Hello, friends. Welcome. So glad that you're here. My name's Casey. I'm one of the pastors here. If we've not met, hello. I want to say hi to our campuses, Homer Glen, New Lenox, Orland Park. Those of you watching online, again, happy 4th of July to all of us celebrating this weekend. And for those of you who lived like it was 1776 because you lost your power this week, we're with you. We're with you. We're in this series called The Curious Collection, and we're talking about some Bible stories that maybe we don't talk about a whole lot, and some of them are unusual. Some of them you may have never heard before. Some of them are a little strange. And the one we're going to talk about this week might be familiar to you, but it is incredibly strange. And I noticed that in the Bible, most of the strangest stories happen to people called prophets. And prophets are interesting dudes, but some really strange things happen to them. Quite a few strange stories involve prophets. There's a story about a prophet who he was asked to preach his message while walking around naked the whole time. And can you just imagine like people going, yep, word of the, got it, we got it, you can stop now. There was a prophet who was asked to cook his food over dung. That's gross. I don't even know how you go about doing that. There was a prophet who was asked to build a tiny city and then pretend he was laying siege to it with little sticks and rocks. Could you imagine? Like something like that. There was a prophet who was touched in a vision on his tongue with a flaming hot coal because his speech, he believed, was impure. Prophets have these weird experiences. And today is no different. We're going to be talking about a prophet named Ezekiel. Here's something else that's helpful to know about prophets. Prophets were really people who were like press secretaries. Their job was to speak for God. And every once in a while, they had these like wild things that they told about the future. But most of their job was to tell the people of God that they needed to return to God or else something dark was going to happen. And they usually showed up in times of crisis. So if you saw a prophet show up, you knew you were in for a tough ride. Because prophets saw things coming. They were concerned with not what the future was going to be necessarily, but what caused that future. God was always inviting them to say, tell my people, if they keep going down this road, this is where they're going to end up. Or here's another way of looking at it. Prophets were constantly pushing people to come back to God because they could see what was coming next. And then after that happens, the prophets were the people who said, now here's how God is going to bring you back. I imagine the prophets were like some of us as parents. And what happens at Parkview stays at Parkview. But if you're a parent, you know your kid occasionally does these things like they'll walk around the house with their eyes closed just to see if they can do it. Has your kid ever done this? It's just me then? Great. And you watch and you're like, that's a bad idea. I should tell them to stop doing that. And then there's a part of you that just goes, let's see what happens. Maybe they're really good at this. The prophets are the people who go, open your eyes, you're about to run into the refrigerator. And so with this story that Ezekiel tells, it's one of those stories where everything has already fallen apart. And now this is how God is going to bring things back together. It starts in Ezekiel 37, verse 1. It says, the hand of the Lord came upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord. And he set me down in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. And he led me all around them. And there were very many lying in the valley, and they were very dry. First thing to know, this is a vision. It's a dream. This is not an actual place. He didn't actually end up in a valley filled with dry bones. It is a picture of what God is inviting him to say. Now that's important because in this time, there's no Steven Spielberg, there's no CGI. Like Ezekiel had no concept of what a valley filled with dry bones would really look like. And so this has got to be incredibly shocking for him. The other thing that's going on in history at this time is that Ezekiel is seeing this vision at a time when he's living in a country that's not his own. Here's a little bit of history on Ezekiel for you. In 597 BC, the people of Israel are invaded by King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. You don't have to remember that. There's not going to be a test, but just so you know. At that point, 10,000 people, including Ezekiel of Israel, were sent to live in Babylon. They were deported out of their country, out of their home. And then in 586 BC, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. So when Ezekiel sees this vision, some things have happened that has thrown everyone's life into chaos. The temple was destroyed. God's presence was destroyed. They lost everything familiar. They lost everything that gave them hope. that had brought them together as a people. Plus, the people of Israel believed that they had this special relationship with God called a covenant. But what happens now? Now that all that's gone, what happens now? And so Ezekiel standing in a valley of dead, dry stuff is probably as much a picture of what he and his people were feeling as anything else. Maybe you and I know that feeling. When we lose things that are familiar, when life takes the legs out from under us, when the things that we connect to that help us make sense of the world that we're in, and we look out and all we can see is dead stuff, dry bones as far as we can see. Which is why what God says next to Ezekiel is so important. And this is what he says. Then he asked me, "Son of man, can these bones become living people again?" All you see is dead, dry stuff. Can these bones become living people again? And I love Ezekiel's reply. "Oh, sovereign Lord, you know the answer to that." Basically, God says, do you think this is it? Is this the end? Is there anything else past this? And Ezekiel's like, I don't know. You know, I don't know. And I have to tell you, there are so many times when I'm with Ezekiel on this one. I'm more in that spot. I'm looking at my own dry bones in my life, and I'm saying, God, I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea if life can come out of this. You do, so do your thing. Because when all we can see is death, it's very hard to see life. It's very hard to see life. And so this prophecy continues. Then God said to me, "Speak a prophetic message to these bones and say, dry bones, listen to the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, I'm going to put breath into you and make you live again. I'll put flesh and muscles on you and cover you with skin, and I will put breath into you. And you will come to life, and then you'll know that I'm the Lord." So imagine you're Ezekiel, and he's looking around at this dead, dry bones, and God says, "Hey, tell them they're going to live again." And Ezekiel's like, okay, sure. Now, this is by far not the strangest thing Ezekiel has ever experienced, but it is the most personal thing he's ever experienced. And I imagine at that point that he felt a little bit of doubt that this was actually possible. And look, let me take a second here. Doubt is actually a part of faith. Doubt is actually part of faith. For us, without doubt, we don't ask the questions we need to ask so that we can grow or we can discover new things. There's really no room for surprise if there's not a little bit of doubt in our faith. Or here's another way of putting it. Doubt is actually a helpful companion for us on the way to faith. It's not the opposite of it. It's a thing that helps us move deeper into our faith. Or one of my favorite quotes from a writer named Frederick Buechner is this: "Doubt is the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving." A little bit of doubt keeps us moving. And so for Ezekiel, he says, I have no idea what's going to happen next. This is up to you. I'm a little concerned because everything looks really, really dead right now. And so many of us give up on faith because we have doubts. We have doubts about the Bible. We have doubts about the stories that we're hearing. We have doubts about the group of people called the church, or sometimes even doubts about the people who lead it. But we cannot let that be the end of the road for us. Even people in the Bible had doubts about what God was up to, and they made the book. They made it into the book. And they had doubts about it. There was a father whose son was ill, and so he calls to Jesus, the person who has this reputation for healing everybody. And Jesus comes to heal his son, and this is what the father says to him. The father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." Like, I believe you can do this, but there's still a part of me that's like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe not this one. This is me sometimes. There are so many things that I believe, and there are some things that I'm still working out. And so if you are in this place and you're listening and you're watching and you feel doubt, you're in the right spot. Don't let that be the end of your faith. So back to Ezekiel. This is what Ezekiel says. "So I spoke this message just as he told me, and suddenly as I spoke, there was a rattling noise all across the valley. The bones of each body came together and attached themselves as complete skeletons." I would be so freaked out at this point. Then I watched as muscles and flesh formed on the bones and the skin formed to cover their bodies, but they still had no breath in them. Like, get past the unbelievably strange picture that this is. It's not done. Life is coming back, but not completely. The structure's there, which had to be an amazing, think about it, Ezekiel watching this, like, what is happening right now? But it's being built back up. But it's not enough. It's not everything. And then he said to me, speak a prophetic message to the winds, son of man. Speak a prophetic message and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, come, O breath, from the four winds, breathe into these dead bodies so that they may live again. God says, I'm going to put them back together structurally, and then I'm going to put life in them. Some scholars believe this is him reversing what happens when a body dies and decomposes. First, the breath leaves it, and then the structure collapses. I also think that's what happens to us sometimes. The spirit, our energy, leaves us, and then our bodies begin breaking down in difficult times and difficult seasons. To a people, Ezekiel's people, who has lost everything, who have been broken down completely and cursed, who felt like they were left for dead, this was such an important message. God said, I am bringing life back to dead places. The dry bones are not the final scene in this story. And here's where we find out in this story that this is about something bigger. It's not just about the bones or the valley or the breath or the structure. Then he said to me, son of man, these bones represent the people of Israel, my people. They're saying, we've become old, dry bones. All hope is gone. Our nation is finished. Therefore, prophesy to them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, oh my people, I will bring you back. I will open your graves of exile and cause you to rise again. Then I will bring you back to the land of Israel. I'll put you back where you belong. When this happens, O my people, you will know that I am the Lord. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live again and return home to your own land. All that stuff that you lost, everything that you're disconnected from, the things that used to give you meaning that you feel like are gone, they will be restored and returned. This is what this is about. This masterful story of dry bones is really about God bringing back people. Because for them, everything they were experiencing felt like death. It felt like a grave. It felt like the end. And God said, no, no, no. The story continues. This is not the end. And that's why this phrase, all hope is gone, is so powerful. Because to me, besides the just unbelievable picture that this is, besides all the strangeness and CGI and all that stuff that we picture in our heads, for me, this is actually a story of hope. And hope is a really interesting thing. Hope is a difficult thing. Hope is a good thing. In the classic film, The Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne is framed for murdering his wife and spends innumerable years in prison. And in the middle of his prison sentence, he says to another inmate, he says this, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. This is wonderful, isn't it? But that's a movie. I mean, this kind of hope is the kind of hope that changes people. It's the kind of hope that is believing for something good when everything in front of us seems to be death and darkness. Hope is keeping us going through just about everything. Hope is the thing that changes us. And the Bible talks about this kind of hope changing us all the time. This kind of hope coming out of really dark places. Paul in Romans 5 says that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. God is constantly, through Jesus, pouring hope into people who are open to it, even when they go through hopeless times of suffering and perseverance. And that's a wonderful, sometimes maybe even magical sounding kind of thing. And it changes us. God is always bringing us hope. And yet at the same time, we don't live in a movie. I live with you and you live with me. And I got to be honest with you, sometimes I'm a lot. Sometimes life is a lot. Our jobs are a lot. Our kids are a lot. Our addictions are a lot. Our inner battles are a lot. The voices in our head, the stories telling us who we are a lot. And so how do we find hope in the midst of all of that? There's no easy way to do it. And that's why one of the first things that I want to share with you about hope, and this is a hopeful thing, but it doesn't sound like, is that hope always brings some kind of tension. Because on the one hand, it's looking at the world and saying, God can do something better than I'm imagining. And on the other hand, it's looking at everybody else and going, yeah, but I'm not so sure. My track record is that it's all dry bones, but I also believe something different can happen. And here's why we know this is true. Ezekiel has this dream, and he shares this dream with people probably in about 573 BC. They don't leave Babylon, the exile, the place of death, the place of darkness. They don't leave there until somewhere around 540 BC. Ezekiel gives them this great story of hope, and it's 30 years before anything changes. Because sometimes hope takes time. Sometimes coming out of a valley of dry bones is a very long journey, and we don't like that. But this picture of the possibility that there is more than the dry bones is what keeps us going. And that's how hope really operates. One of the things that Paul says about hope too in Romans 8, he says, now hope that is seen is not hope. If you see it, you got it. It's not, you don't have to hope anymore. It's right there in front of you. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. What kind of patience? Well, sometimes 30 years. Sometimes a while. Hope brings attention because it's a belief that something good is going to happen, but it might not happen tomorrow. And that's why we need God to help guide us through it. That's why we need God's strength to move through it. It may be a while that we carry this hope. It is a long road, but it's the better road. And while we're going through that, if we lean into the hope that God has for us and we lean into that tension, a couple of other things start happening. First is that hope rebuilds us. Hope rebuilds us. If you've ever experienced a period of darkness and difficulty and hopelessness, one of the things that we notice is that we start to fall apart, sometimes literally, sometimes metaphorically. But for Ezekiel, the first thing that God does is he puts the bones back together, the structure, the basics. And look, there are bones. God isn't giving him this dream and going, hey, just in case one day you encounter a really dark, difficult time, it's right there in front of him. It's like, this has all fallen apart. So let me show you how I'm going to rebuild it. So when we find ourselves in hopeless places, we feel like the basic stuff is just torn apart. None of the stories that used to help our lives make sense anymore. The things that used to give us joy that we enjoy, we just don't do it anymore. That's what it looks like to enter a valley of dry bones. And the first thing that God does for us at that point is begin to build us and put us back together. Remember this line from the passage, I will open your graves of exile and I will cause you to rise again. God picks us up. One of the wonderful things we can hope for, and that I'm inviting you to hope for if you're in a hopeless spot, is that God can put us back together, even in the simple, small things. Hope allows us a lot of times to rest. Sometimes when we're in those difficult spots, we just need a moment to rest. Hope teaches us to slow down, to be quiet, to eat something. One of the most interesting stories for me in the Bible is the story of the prophet Elijah, and he feels like he wants to die. He is at his most hopeless, and do you know what God does for him? He gives him a snack and tells him to take a nap. Like right now, you're not ready for the next thing. You're not ready to go and be fully filled with life again, so let me put you back together. So the rebuilding is about those very simple things that we lose when everything falls apart, when we feel hopeless, but also it's about getting out of our many graves that we face. The graves of habits that we use to cope, and the process only leads us to more graves. The grave of the thoughts that keep us spinning around death. The grave of stories, negative stories we keep telling ourselves. God wants to tell us a new story, a helpful story, And that's why a lot of times when I'm trying to help people through spaces like this, it really begins with how we think. If we get ourselves convinced of an idea, it will change everything about us. And so when God rebuilds us, one of the things he does is helps to change our minds, what we think about. In the middle of our dry bones, Paul says this in Philippians, finally, beloved, whatever's true, whatever's honorable, whatever is just, whatever's pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. It is so hard in hopeless spots to think about that kind of stuff instead of focusing on the dry bones right in front of us. But God says, I'm bringing you hope, and here's what you can do. If we begin to think about the things that are good and lovely and praiseworthy and trustworthy, we begin to rebuild. And God continually brings us things like that. Our thoughts are so important because for hopeless people to find hope, it's just doing the simple things. The simple things that help us see something that we didn't think was there in the first place. And maybe we need a counselor for that. There's nothing wrong with that. We may need another person to help us with our thoughts. We may need to just write them down somewhere. Sometimes we need, in a moment of hopelessness, we're facing a valley of dry bones, sometimes a journal could be your best friend. And you don't have to, but man, sometimes putting your thoughts down in ink or digital ink, sometimes we don't know what we're thinking until we write it down. God rebuilds us by giving us simple things to reconnect with and by changing the way that we think about the world. So hope rebuilds us, but then also hope fills us. Hope fills us. It's not enough just to have our stuff put back together. There has to be something more than that. And in the passage it says this, I will put my spirit in you and you will live again and return home to your own land. Spirit in the Bible is such an interesting word because spirit is creativity. In the beginning, when God created the world, the Spirit was there, moving around, making stuff. Spirit is creativity. Spirit is energy. It's the juice we need to keep going. Spirit is also breath, literal breath shot into us that keeps us alive, that keeps us going. So it's fine to get put back together. It's fine to get all the pieces and begin to do the simple things that help us reconnect with the way that God has designed us to live, but then we need something else. We need something to fill us and inspire us and keep us going. And I don't think that this language in Ezekiel is an accident, because this is the same language that shows up at the very beginning when people are created. In Genesis chapter 2, it says this, then the Lord formed man from the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man become a living being. It's one thing to be a body. It's another thing to be inspired, to be energized. Because when we're hopeless, one of the things we need is, what is the thing that is going to keep me moving forward? What is the thing that's going to keep me going even if this takes 30 years? What's the thing that's going to help me get through this conversation or this decision or this practice or this habit or this change that I need to make? I don't want that change. Some of my hopelessness is not my own fault. But now it's my responsibility. What is going to keep me going through that? God promises that when we come back from the valley of dry bones, survival isn't all there is. There's a life on the other side of that. So if you're in a hopeless spot right now, can I just encourage you, there is something on the other side. God will put you back together, and you can hope in that. You may doubt it because you're staring at a valley of dry bones, but you can hope on the other side. But not just that, not just that you're going to get through it, but there is going to be life on the other side, and there is going to be some good stuff that comes with having gone through this valley. It could bring you some wisdom. It could be wiser. I find the wisest people in my life are the people who have scars. I never would trust a shop teacher when I was in high school who wasn't missing at least one digit. They've learned something. Wise people are people with scars, and there is nothing that gives you scars more than going through the valley of dry bones. Maybe after all that, we learn to trust people differently. Maybe after going through all that, we learn that we aren't indestructible. Did you know that? If you didn't, let me be the first to tell you, we are not indestructible. We are not perfect. We start to know that God will teach us and help us through everything we go through, every single thing we experience, whether it's a hopeless season or a difficult season. A valley of dry bones is not the final story. God will teach us and move us through it. Hope that comes from knowing we don't have to live the way we used to. Sometimes it's just we get into a habit and a pattern like this is how you survive. My parents did it this way and I'm doing it this way, but then Dr. Phil steps in and goes, how's that working out for you? And you have to ask yourself, do I want to keep doing this? And that's where God steps in and says, do you know you don't have to, right? You don't have to keep coming back to this valley over and over again. Instead, as Paul says in Romans 12, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, by the changing of your minds, so you can discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Do you want to stop being in the same cycle of thoughts and actions that have put you back in this valley again? You don't have to stay there. It's important to know, though, in this passage when he says, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, the word world here means an approach to life that isn't in line with what God desires. So basically, for some of us, there are things that seem like a good idea at the time, but they end us up in a valley of dry bones. Sometimes we do take ourselves there. But God steps in and he says, you can hope in the fact that you don't have to live that way, to live in that cycle, to keep making those same mistakes over and over again. Because the people in exile in Ezekiel's time, all they can see in the future is more disappointment, more loss, more pain. And this is where Ezekiel injects some hope, and he says, this might take some time, but if you feel like everything is dying, just know on the other side there is life. God will put you back together, God will breathe back into you and bring you out of this really dark place. And that's true for us too. Even if sobriety doesn't come immediately, there's hope that getting clean is the destination that God is moving us toward. Even if the divorce is painful, even if our kids don't make the choices that we want, even if the scent of infidelity still hangs in our homes, even if the one hasn't shown up yet, there's still hope. The valley in front of us is not the end of the story. God will put us back together. God will breathe into us. And we need that. I don't know. Let me be honest. I need that. Every day I need to be reminded of that. A new way of seeing the world. Some new lenses to look at things. Or just to believe that God will give us the ability to see hope beyond the dry bones that are clouding our vision. God will give us the ability to see beyond the dry bones that are clouding our vision. The hope. The hope. I was thinking about my air conditioning went out this week like the rest of you. And most of us now can be like, I kind of know what hell feels like. 90 degrees with... And so I had some time to think while I was waiting for somebody to come and fix it. And I was thinking about the 4th of July, the holiday. And when I was a kid, we used to spend it with my mom's side of the family. And they all lived at the end of a road that was just theirs. And I just remember we'd spend all day just slamming grape soda and cookies and hot dogs all day during the daylight, just consuming. It was myself, my 2 cousins, and my sister. And then it would get to dark, and then our parents, these really responsible people, thoughtful, would say, what would be the best thing to hand a child who is literally electric right now? They're vibrating with sugar. A sparkler. And so I just have these vivid memories of me and my cousins with a sparkler in each hand, jacked up on sugar, running through the field screaming, "Rah!" you know? And now I look back and I think about that circle of people, and I haven't seen them in quite a while. My grandmothers and grandfather have since passed. One of my uncles has passed. My cousins have gone and gotten married and started their own lives, so has my sister. And I just wonder, if I called them, if I needed them, would they be there? It's been a while. I haven't talked to them in quite a while. Would they be there? And I have this hope in me that they would. Even though we haven't talked, even though I don't have any current evidence that that's going to happen, my hope is that they will. And that's what hope is. In Hebrews it says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I believe that, I hope in that, I trust that, even though I don't have any evidence in front of me to say that it would. When you and I are facing our valley of dry bones, that's what we're doing. Everything we see says the otherwise, but we are hoping for a holy surprise reversal where God shows up and puts us back together and fills us with life again. So today, you may have little evidence that this valley of dry bones is going to end anytime soon. But to you, I want to offer you a question. What if right now God is speaking to you and saying, my child, do you believe that I can make these dry bones dance again? Do you believe? Can you hope, even with your doubt, can you hope that on the other side of this valley, there is life, that I can put you back together? I'd like to end today a little differently. I want to spend some time asking a few questions. So I'm going to invite you to do something together. This may be a little different, but it's a different kind of weekend, so I feel like it fits. We're going to spend a little bit of time with a very short meditation. Before you think, oh, that's a New Age thing, David in the Bible was doing this way before anybody else was. So I invite you to close your eyes wherever you are. Don't worry, it's not going to get too weird. I want you to close your eyes and just take a couple deep breaths. Maybe your weekend has been really busy. You've been all over the place. Just take a few big deep breaths and let yourself slow down. Today there's a few questions I want us to spend some time with, and there's no pressure here. Just inviting you to listen to whatever God might have to say to you. And you may not be a person of faith at all. You may think this whole thing is kind of strange and somebody bribed you here with food. That's fine. But this might be a moment where God has something for you. And these questions are going to be on a slide if you want to look up and see them, but if not, I can walk you through them too. As you breathe, ask yourself, what kind of valley are you looking at right now? What's causing you to feel hopeless? Just name it, call it what it is. What kind of valley are you looking at right now? Second question, where do you need God's hope to rebuild the basic stuff in your life? Maybe you feel like you've just been broken completely down. Where do you need God's hope to rebuild some of the basic stuff? Your body, your mind. Third is, where do you need God's hope to inspire you to move forward? Maybe you feel like God has put you back together after in the middle of a really difficult season, but now you need to know how to go forward. You've got some decisions to make. You've got some calls to make, some things you need to do. Where do you need God's hope to inspire you to move forward? And finally, what is God's hope asking you to do next? What's the next good thing God's hope is inviting you to do? It might be to decide to be baptized. It might be to have a conversation with a person that you desperately need to talk to and make things right with. Maybe it's to call a counselor. Maybe it's to go to an AA meeting, whatever it might be. What is God's hope in asking you to do next? God, I'm grateful for the story of Ezekiel. I'm grateful that the dry bones are not the end. I'm grateful that you have brought us here today to hear this story, to picture it in our minds, and to hear what you have to say about it to our own lives. As we're looking at our own dry bones, as we're looking at our own hopeless seasons, and we might be halfway through what feels like 30 years of just moving from one step to another, I ask that you give my friends in this room the courage that they need, the hope that they need to keep moving. I ask that you let this story be a fire in their hearts. I ask that you let it be the breath in their lungs that helps them choose every single day to let you rebuild them, to let you inspire them. And even in the midst of the doubts they have, that they might find a place to anchor their hope in you. We're grateful for this day. And we're grateful that you're here and that we're here with you. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.